So my name is Fraser. I work for the Consultation Institute, which is a not-for-profit best practice organisation in the UK dealing with public consultation. So we advise local government on how best to consult. And as you can imagine, young people are an essential part of the consultation process. I've got about 10 slides for you. I'm going to talk about social networking and how we can leverage social networks with young people to harvest people's conversations, comments, opinions, and feed them into policymakers. The first thing I did when I was invited to this session was I wanted to consult. I wanted to ask a young person what they thought about policymaking in the EU, about their contribution. And the first thing that came to my mind was, do I know any young people? Because I'm officially an old person now. Used to be a young person. And I thought, yeah, my cousin's 17. How do I contact my cousin? Well, the answer was Facebook. I thought, is he at school? Yes, he was at school, but will he answer? Well, yes, he did. Within a period of an hour, I got this conversation from him. I'm not going to repeat all of it verbatim because there are some words in there which are a little bit rude in English. You can probably spot them. But essentially it went something along the lines of, and I'm in the blue, by the way. I said, how come you're not active in policy making? I knew he wasn't. And he said, I don't really understand it. I wouldn't want to make a mistake, lol. Which I thought was perfect. You know, he was kind of, if I was going to have a say, it would be implemented directly. And then I went on to ask, do you care? And he says, I do. Because then he says, it affects me, doesn't it? It affects me, no. Well, I think it does. I don't know. Jeez. You know, he was a confused young person who didn't even really understand whether European policy making had an effect on him. Then he goes on to say some rude things. I say goodbye, and then right at the end he says, I just said some terrible things, and he's used an emoticon, and he probably will hate me, and I've asked his permission to show this, but you know, he hates the answers he gave. Well, my research of one person, my non-statistical research, suggests to me that he really does care. If it's relevant, it must be clear. He feels uninformed. He talks about why don't they get educated in school about these things. But crucially, there's hope that potentially I could change him. I could have some influence on him. I should probably have brought him here because I had a spare bed in my room. So, you know, he'd have loved to have actually changed his mind. But it's not just what he said that's important. And, you know, I've also done some spying on Elisa here. Social networks also give us loads of other data. You know, it's a gold mine of information. I've discovered that Elisa's, looks like she's been to the zoo. From her Twitter feed, I know she's been to these various countries. I know that she prolifically tweets at about 2 p.m., which is presumably after your lunch, I don't know. And she's got an iPhone. You know, I know all of these things without even looking at what she's said. Of course, I know her likes, her dislikes, or some of them at least, her affiliations. And we talked about intermediaries previously, but you know, she's an influencer. Potentially, her retweeting something of mine is going to increase my reach, and I might actually get to an audience that I couldn't normally access. So influencers are really important in social media. You probably understand that. You know, young people, maybe they look up to celebrities more than they do policymakers, possibly. So sorry about that, sorry about the intrusion, but I thought you'd like to see it. So I think the problem we've got is we've got all these structured conversations on the left-hand side here between institutions and policymakers, which are very top-down and very much in the language of policymakers, and I think Anthony is probably not here, referred to that this morning. And on the other side, you've got these unstructured conversations, so the horizontal dialogues between young people that are on social media. And we're not really bridging that gap, or we're not doing it very effectively. You know, some MEPs are doing it, but generally speaking, I don't think we're being terribly efficient at it. I kind of like the quote there from the UN, which also suggests that, you know, as adults, it's our duty to go and solve the problem. course, there are a bunch of challenges. You know, the acute one for me about social media is that only a tiny fraction of what people are saying is actually opinion, or is actually worth really listening to. You know, the times I open my Twitter feed and I hear about someone, what they've had for lunch, the dog walk, or something like that. 3 to 4%, I reckon, is usable content. There are many channels. We were in Croatia a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of the young people there were not using Facebook, they were using Instagram. So we can't just rely on one single channel. There's content that we can't even access because it's behind a walled garden. And there's this ethical debate. You know, when I went and stalked Elisa there, was it creepy or was it all right? She still hasn't told me. And then there's languages, you know, making sense of everything. Daniel van Lerberg, hello Daniel. You mentioned the ASK project earlier, which is a European Erasmus Plus funded project. I thought I'd give a quick plug for it, very quick because I'm not involved. But essentially what they're doing is they're acting as a data broker between those structured and unstructured conversations. They are contriving a conversation about a topic. I'm not sure contriving would be an accepted word. But they're making those conversations apparent to young people by interpreting the language that's used, running a dialogue in the social media space, and then interpreting what young people said, relaying it back to policymakers. So I think that's quite an interesting project to look at if you've got a chance. The URL is askproject.eu. But the one I want you to be really excited about is this one. It's called Deep Linking Youth. ECAS are involved, and so are the Consultation Institute and a few other partners. It's similar but different. So the purpose of this project is to stimulate social media with content generated by young people so that they might get excited or understand. And then work with the influencers that we find in those spaces to generate a conversation about that content, to then absorb what people have said or the kind of casual conversations that are going on, to amplify them, to extend the reach, and finally to raise awareness of the outcome to policymakers. Something that's apparent to me this morning was that, and I can't remember who mentioned it, we've got this situation where often there's no promise of action as a result of listening. I think that's a real kick in the you-know-where. Because actually, why should people give their opinion? Why should anyone have a voice when there's no promise to make a change? And we need some more, a better mandate probably for some of these participatory exercises. So this project doesn't actually promise to change anything. It doesn't really necessarily promise to even get the policymakers talking about what they've seen, although it's going to push hard to do that. The young people we've engaged with so far, they've been absolutely amazing in generating digital content. On the left here is a piece of content that was created by Croatians. They've created videos and images. Hopefully you'll recognize that's a play on a very famous album cover from a fantastic British pop group. There's no prize. You can't see here, they're actually advertising Erasmus. So with this content, our intention is to take this content, expose some influencers to it, and try and distribute that and get someone talking about Erasmus. I thought I'd also give you a teaser of the kind of dashboard that we are trying to create. This is a draft. We're not really anywhere close to finishing it yet, but here's a real-time dashboard of sentiment, volumes of conversations that are going on about certainly learning mobility in Europe. And then we've got various word clouds about topics that are coming up. But I think the important thing is, top right, we are extracting nuggets of information, golden nuggets of things that young people are saying from the web and putting those up on the dashboard. We're doing that by some very clever analytical procedures, but also in manually training a machine to identify relevant content. Do you remember I said 3 to 4% of content is actually relevant? Well, we are going through each of the comments we see. This one's rubbish, so we'd skip it. We're rating it. We are looking at the theme, and eventually we'll have an algorithm, we hope, that will be able to filter out the noise. So what can it look like eventually? Well, you know, maybe this. Maybe this dashboard would appear in a reception area or in a policymaker's bedroom, probably not. Office, possibly. And, you know, the nice thing is you don't even have to use a computer to glance and see what's going on. So we're really bridging a divide between the digital and the in-person. And we hope that might be a future vision of perhaps how the dashboard's used. So just a reminder to go and have a look at the Deep Linking Youth website for more information about the project. I guess final words I want to say is that you know, the Consultation Institute deals with a lot of consultations that concern young people. For example, closure of libraries. Yet, very infrequently do we find that local government policymakers design a consultation for young people or treat them specifically as a stakeholder group. You know, I think people have to treat young people as a serious stakeholder group, and they have to design their activities for young people, and that might even be changing the questions they use or going into schools to get people's opinions. Libraries, remember, lots of young people using libraries. They probably only get their say through their parents. Thank you.